Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I don't know if you guys can tell, I do have my ring light set to a pink setting, which is supposed to reflect on my face a little bit to make this look a little bit more neon. But I am not actually sure if you can see that or if it shows up or is worth the effort. Today we are talking about one of my most anticipated movies of 2021. That's Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho, starring Thomasin McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy. You guys have no idea how excited I was for this movie. Okay, so before we get started talking about Last Night in Soho, I just want to mention to you guys we're going to be talking non-spoilers, and I will warn you when the spoiler section is going to come, and I'll probably put a timestamp too. So if you haven't seen the movie, don't worry, you're safe watching this video, and I will warn you when we are going to talk about the plot in further detail. Let's read the synopsis. So, an aspiring fashion designer is mysteriously able to enter the 1960s, where she encounters a dazzling wannabe singer. However, the glamour is not all it appears to be, and the dreams of the past start to crack and splinter into something far darker. And this came out on October 29th, so we are getting a late review on this. I am giving Last Night in Soho a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this movie. It was not all that I expected it to be. So in the trailer, we are shown a lot, and if you have not seen the trailer yet, maybe it's best that you skip it just because the trailer actually seems to make the movie out to be a little bit different than what it actually is. Let's talk a little bit about the performances in this movie. So Thomasin McKenzie plays our lead character, who is an aspiring fashion designer, kind of naive to what the big city life has to offer because she is from like the countryside and she's very young but just excited to explore. She has all these dreams and aspirations. I really thought that Thomasin McKenzie did a great job of portraying this character accurately. Her character goes through a lot. She is miserable throughout so much of the film, and you see the moments where she is happy and excited and inspired, contrasting with the moments where she is scared in this big city and she just doesn't feel like she fits in or like it's the place for her. Now, of course, this is a common trope in a lot of movies, so this type of premise is nothing new, but I really do think Thomasin McKenzie did a great job in her role. Anya Taylor-Joy, of course, as always, killed it with her role of Sandy in this film, a girl from the 1960s who is constantly the subject of the flashbacks / dreams or visions that Thomasin McKenzie's character is having. I'm obsessed with Anya Taylor-Joy. I feel like she can just act with her eyes and her facial expressions even when she doesn't have a lot of lines. It's amazing. She just is really good at like enthralling people into the plot, and she's so intriguing and mysterious. So I think that she was a great addition to this film. I cannot imagine anyone else playing Sandy and having this movie actually work, if I'm being honest. We also get Matt Smith, who is playing Jack, and he's a very like menacing presence throughout the film. I think he did an amazing job. He just has one of those faces that works for the role, if that makes sense, and his body language and demeanor throughout is just really good and fitting. So I really enjoyed the performances from all of our lead actors, and I think that they really brought the film together. I'm not sure that it would have been the same. Also, the soundtrack just gives this movie life. We have so many great songs from the 60s. We get a cover by Anya Taylor-Joy of Downtown, and we get a lot of that dazzling singing and dancing, and I guess at the beginning a lot of glamorization, but then of course we get into the real like gritty things that were going on as well. So the whole movie is not just a nostalgia based thing that's glamorizing a certain time period. We also are getting the negatives as well. So in that way, I think that the movie is fair, and I like that it is more thought-provoking than your average flick of the same premise. Also, we get such a blend of genres in this movie, which I'm not going to spoil, of course. We're not in the spoiler section yet, but we get a genre blend, and I've been so into that lately. Since The Night House was such a genre blend, I've just really kind of gained respect for the movies that decide to take that risk. I'm loving these genre blends lately, like The Night House and Last Night in Soho. You just cannot categorize them into one like subgenre of horror. It's almost like there are so many things about it. There are so many different subgenres included in it. Like in Last Night in Soho, you are getting mystery, you're getting a little bit of like supernatural thriller, you're getting coming of age, you're getting like almost a musical vibe as well, 1960s nostalgia, suspense, like all of these things, just a little bit of horror, not a lot of horror. That's the other thing about this movie. I think the advertising might have made it seem like this is more of a horror than it actually is. And the trailer shows way too much. Like, why would the trailer show so much if you want to keep that intrigue there? If you really want to hold and captivate the attention of audiences, having some of those things revealed in the trailer just doesn't make any sense. I'm going to have to keep this non-spoiler section pretty short as to not ruin anything for you guys, because in my mind I can't even remember what things are really spoilers and what are not, just because there's so much that happens in this movie. It's a journey. I think it's one that deserves a rewatch actually, and I really want to go back to the theaters to watch it again. I do have a movie pass, so I can go back and I'm not like paying every time I go. I'm not going to touch on this too much, but some people have told me that this was kind of based on the giallo style of film, which I do not know very much about at all, so I'm not going to like go into it. But if anybody who does know about giallo films, which are like an Italian mystery murder type of movie, then let me know if you feel like this gives you the same vibe. Before we get into the spoiler talk, I just wanted a word with some of you guys who haven't seen the movie yet. Don't expect something extremely dark and extremely twisted and really heavy on horror elements. I would go in expecting a little bit more of a mystery, and if you go in with that, then I think you're really going to enjoy this film. But if you go in hoping to actually be like scared, I don't think that this movie is going to do it for you. I'm actually sad that the marketing is the way it is, because I think it prevented a lot of people who aren't super into horror from going to see this movie, which I think they would have actually enjoyed. Obviously, horror fans might be a little bit disappointed too if they're expecting it to go this really dark route. I was actually having this discussion on Discord, you guys. Do you think the mystery genre is coming back? I really hope that it is, because we are getting a few films here and there that are just kind of like straight up mysteries, and I'm really enjoying them because I feel like they're very enthralling. Like, you can really put yourself in the movie. In Last Night in Soho, I was not bored for 1 second of the entire movie. But anyways, I could make a whole video on this topic that I'll save for a later time, so let's go ahead and get into the spoiler section of my Last Night in Soho review. Okay, you have been warned. We are talking spoilers for this movie. I will give you a few seconds. You guys, I know some people have said that this movie is predictable, but the twist at the end really got me. I actually thought that the old man was in fact the older version of Jack. I did not think that Sandy, the Anya Taylor-Joy character, was going to be the one who has murdered all of those men. Now, some of you guys may have seen that coming from before, but for me, I really didn't have a clue. Now, I did pick up on the fact that Sandy was perhaps not murdered, as Eloise was looking through all of the 1960s like journalist articles and things like that, newspaper articles, and she was not really able to find anything about a woman murdered. I did kind of figure out that the older woman perhaps was Sandy, as she did resemble her a bit, and at the end, towards the end, you start to see some clues that hint towards her actually being Sandy. But I really thought that the older man was Jack. I didn't realize that Jack was actually murdered by Sandy, and the older man was the gentleman that had given her a drink but was telling her that she was actually better than that and she didn't need to do this and blah blah blah. So obviously she never like amounted to murdering him, but all the other men were murdered and buried in the house as well, which that was an interesting plot twist. That's been happening a lot in horror movies lately, by the way. I love how Sandy and Eloise represent a lot of the same person, both coming to the city with aspiring dreams and then those dreams slowly being crushed, as we see Eloise throughout the movie is just plagued by these waking nightmares, I guess you could say. That's a malignant thing. But she's obviously discouraged from her dream, and the same thing happens with Sandy. We get a perspective on what it was like for female performers in the 1960s as well. So really, for a majority of the film, we're following Eloise and we see her perspective on things and her glamorized vision of the 60s and London in the 1960s. But as we slowly uncover Sandy's story, then it becomes a lot more real and gritty, and the glamour of it is taken out. Now, let me just tell you, I disliked Jack so much in this movie. He was terrible. He was basically a pimp. It was awful. And I mean, thinking back to the movie, things all start to go wrong at the beginning when Sandy is inside of a bar or some kind of hall and she asks to speak to the owner. Instead, she is directed to Jack, who's actually a pimp, and we do not know that at this point. And therefore, he brings her to audition for somebody else, and that's how she ends up kind of stuck in this. But of course, that's how the recruitment process works for these sort of things, and how a lot of girls end up stuck in things like that. Now, as Jack became Sandy's manager, she didn't really have much of another choice, as he was managing so many different women, and it just was a big disaster. It was going to end in disaster. I just didn't know it was going to end in the disaster that it did. I loved seeing Eloise's story parallel to Sandy's, as she really is a misfit in this fashion school in London. Her roommates are awful. They are rude. They are just jealous, especially, I forgot her name, but the main roommate who she meets at the beginning, she just comes off as being so jealous and ingenuine, which of course leads Eloise to have to rent her room from somebody else. Now, this movie was so much in one. It was like The Sixth Sense. It was like La La Land, a little bit of Promising Young Woman in there. Of course, the murder mystery, just so much. Like, I can't even tell you what genre I think this movie goes into, because I don't know. It's not that really deep psychological thriller that we all thought it was going to be. It isn't that at all. It's just so much mixed into one thing. And I'm not saying this in a negative light or even a positive light. I just think that this is its own entity of a movie. And I like when movies do that, where you can't really categorize them neatly into something. Now, there were a couple of moments in this movie that got to me. I'm not going to say much because on YouTube I can't really, but there's a scene where she is in her room with, what was his character's name? Oh, John. So Eloise was in her room with John, and she is seeing on her ceiling a vision of what is happening to Sandy. And that was just a terrifying scene for me. I also thought that a lot of the scenes with Jack were really scary as well, just because of his presence, and that, of course, is a compliment to the actor. The actual ghosts of the men that we see throughout the film weren't really scary to me, but they definitely felt disorienting. They gave the movie a disorienting vibe, like when you're in a dream and you're trying to focus on something like somebody's face or your hand, but it doesn't look quite right. It's almost deformed in a sense because, of course, it's just blurry. It's like this blurry, out of focus image that you cannot focus on no matter how hard you try, and that's the vibe that I got from these men that you see all around Eloise. So no wonder she was going absolutely insane, because that's like what she was seeing in her everyday life. Now, the visions she sees of Sandy and the flashbacks and Jack are completely clear. So it's only these ghosts of the men that she cannot actually fully see and that are coming after her, it seems like, throughout. Which it seems like they're just trying to tell her what actually happened, but I felt like they brought more of a claustrophobic and disorienting element than an actual scary element. That all being said, I was confused a little bit by this movie. One of the reasons I want to go back and watch it again, and it really does need a second watch in my opinion. So here's a few things that I wasn't completely sure of. First of all, why did Eloise see Sandy being stabbed and murdered by Jack when that's actually not what happened? Now, I know that older Sandy tells Eloise that her soul was killed and her dreams and aspirations were killed, but we see this manifest as a physical murder. And there's nothing to imply that Sandy is somehow able to manipulate Eloise's dreams or visions. In the end, it is revealed that the truth of that scene was Sandy was stabbing Jack. Was it supposed to be that he tried to murder her and then she murdered him instead, and that's how she got started with her murdering men business? Or did she plan to murder him? I guess we won't know. I'm gonna try to watch it again and pick up on clues and see if I can figure it out. Why weren't the murdered men able to come through earlier and tell Eloise what actually happened? Now, I really was a fan of Eloise's ability to see people who have passed away, but I didn't realize that included being able to see visions of things that happened in the past, which only happens in her dreams at first and then slowly manifests its way into her reality. Now, this part I don't need to be explained because it seems to be like just a supernatural element at play mixed in with her psychic sense. But the third act of this movie had me very confused, because when Eloise comes back with John and she wants to get all of her things, she is then poisoned by older Sandy. Now, the poison doesn't really seem to do anything, or maybe it was just taking a while to work because she was fine and doesn't actually pass out at any point. But older Sandy poisons her as the police have visited her house, and I think it might have been because she thought if they searched, they would find the bodies of the men. So that part made sense. I don't think she knew that Eloise was actually suspecting her of murdering men. I think she did believe Eloise in that she was looking for a murdered girl, but either way it might have led to bodies being found, which is why Sandy had to murder Eloise in her mind, which honestly didn't make a lot of sense because Eloise would obviously be noted missing by her school, even by her grandma, and so for Sandy to attempt to kill her would be even more risky, as it would probably lead to the investigators coming and searching her house anyways. But never mind that, as we continue further into the ending, Sandy decides to actually let Eloise go. Now at first she wants to murder her and John, who is kind of her boyfriend at this point, not really, and then the house starts burning, there's a fire. Now Eloise goes back up to the bedroom and tells Sandy she understands why she committed the murders, and because she seems to understand and accept what Sandy did, Sandy then tells her to leave, and she is okay with sitting there and then burning to death. Which, you guys, this is not an A24 film, so no, we're not going to watch her physically burn to death. Sandy's decision to perish in the fire was just a little bit confusing. Now, one of the other parts of the movie I really enjoyed is when the character, the older man who we think is Jack, but he is not, is killed in a car crash, presumed killed. That part was terrifying. I was not expecting that to happen. There was a little bit of gore. There's not a whole lot of gore in this movie, only in the stabbing scenes and in that scene, I believe, and that was intense. On Discord, somebody did mention how the almost stabbing that occurred in the library between Eloise and her roommate would have resulted in more consequences, but at the end of the movie we see that Eloise has a happy ending, as her dresses that she has designed, inspired by the 60s, are on the runway models at the fashion show, and everything seems to be normal, so we can assume that everything got sorted out somehow in this complicated mystery of things. I mean, so essentially, putting aside all of the different things that this movie is, at the heart of it, Eloise solves a unsolved murder from the 60s and is able to put the souls of the men who were killed at rest, as well as Sandy's, the murderer's, soul at rest, as well, as she is okay with sacrificing herself in the end. There isn't really a reason for her to do this. She could have just got up and left, but perhaps she knew that somehow people would find out that she was the murderer of the men, or Eloise would have already talked to the police or something like that, and so she decides to just die in the fire. I'm not sure if it really makes sense to me, if I'm being honest, but even though there are quite a few loose ends in this movie, I really found it to be an enjoyable experience that I want to experience again. I want to go watch it again. I want to be able to rewatch this movie. I would love to rewatch this movie. I was not bored one time, as I mentioned before. I was entertained throughout the whole thing. So I'm very curious to what you guys thought of Last Night in Soho. And if you actually were disappointed by it, I have to ask you if it's because of the marketing, because honestly, for the people I've talked to that were slightly disappointed by this movie, a lot of it did have to do with the marketing as a psychological thriller. And so I kind of want to make a whole video about how marketing can affect the audience's perception of movies, but that might be something for the future. I mean, recently this happened to me watching Lamb, watching Saint Maud, which I will talk about in my November Letterboxd recap probably, but a lot of movies seem to have this issue, and so I think it's something that is worth having a conversation about. Okay, you guys, I know this video is getting long at this point. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments below, but if you are going to talk spoilers, please mark them so we don't ruin the movie for anybody else. If you are enjoying this content, by the way, don't forget to subscribe, maybe turn on the notification bell. My channel's still fairly new. I started it in August. It's actually my second channel, so I'm not posting like super consistently. I'm not always able to post every single week, but if you guys are interested in the stuff I'm talking about here and more people subscribe to the channel, so I know more people are enjoying it, then I will try and make things a little bit more consistent here. I just kind of want to see where it goes, and it's mainly just for me to have an outlet to talk about all of these things that maybe not necessarily my friends would always want to talk about. But as always, thank you so much for watching today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!